Hello and welcome. You're watching Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and it's good to have you with us. President Trump's national intelligence chief has told the U.S. Senate that North Korea is unlikely to completely get rid of its nuclear weapons. This flies in the face of Trump and his administration's previously asserted goal of final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. We'll look at that issue further later in the programme. But first, we get the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Centre. Devin?
Hi, Jung-ho. South Korea's exports look like they're going to be down for a second month in a row compared to last year. This January, prices were lower for semiconductors, plus there are a number of uncertainties at home and abroad. But the government's going to provide support so this doesn't continue. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The government says it'll come out with measures by next month to revitalize Korean exports. At a meeting held Wednesday, Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi said the country's exports for January, like last month, are expected to remain below the levels seen over the same period the previous year. He cited falling prices of semiconductors, Korea's main export item, rising trade uncertainties stemming from China-U.S. trade disputes, and the slowing growth of the global economy as the main reasons.
Based on the meeting, the government is to release support measures next month tailored to exporting industries, starting with the building of foreign plants, contents, and agricultural and fisheries products.
During the meeting, Hong also unveiled the government's plans to invest a combined $2.9 billion this year in the ICT sector. The government aims to increase the number of ICT-related jobs to more than 1.1 million in 3 years and boost ICT exports by 20% from last year to $264.3 billion by 2022. Korea's Trade Ministry is to release figures for the country's exports for January this Friday. If a slump is confirmed, it'll be the first time since 2016 that Korean exports see an on-year contraction for the second consecutive month. Exports in December decreased by 1.2% on-year. Data released by Korea Customs Service last week show the country's exports for the first 20 days of this month have shrunk by 14.6% compared to the same period last year to record $25.7 billion. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in held a lunch meeting with his economic advisors today in which they're believed to have discussed the economy and the slowdown in growth. The president's special advisor for science and economy and the new vice chair of the National Economic Advisory Council were in attendance, both of whom were appointed last week. Since the turn of the year, President Moon's been focusing on the economy, holding a series of events with business tycoons and startup firms as part of his drive to boost growth and jobs. Last year's Paralympics in Pyeongchang helped change many people's perceptions in South Korea of people with disabilities. It's apparently true for the government, too, which has decided to simplify the way it provides benefits to disabled people and to expand the benefits. Our Cha Sang-mi has this story.
This taxi is for people with disabilities who travel seated in a wheelchair. But not all disabled people could use it due to the strict disabilities grading system. Long persisting perceptions of the disabled began to change in South Korea last year when the government announced plans to simplify the 31-year-old policy of providing services to disabled people according to the severity of their disability.
The long-cherished wish for people with disabilities, the abolition of grades of disabilities, comes into effect this July. The government should put in more effort so the disabled can actually feel more changes.
The implementation of the new policy comes after a year of discussions and research between the government and associations concerning people with disabilities. Starting July, the government will, in phases, boost support for the disabled through equipment and devices, facilities and living, as well as emergency safety services. This includes plans to increase the number of specialist schools for disabled students to 199, building over 20 schools by year 2022. As for subsidies, the government has already raised the basic monthly disability allowance, but is looking to increase it further up to $270. The 6 grades of severity will also be recategorized into 2 grades, severe conditions and not severe conditions. The PM at a meeting on the new disability policies on Wednesday said, despite the changes, people with disabilities face many challenges.
The employment rate for people with disabilities is only half the employment rate for ordinary citizens, and per capita income for the disabled is also only 2/3 the normal income.
The Prime Minister called for a wise solution to disabled community care to avoid any more conflicts from policy change. 차상미, Arirang News.
South and North Korea have agreed to phase in civilian access to the Hangang River estuary near their sea border on a trial basis starting April 1st. Officials from the two sides met this morning at the border village of Panmunjom to discuss the map of the area's hydrographical features after South Korea drew up a nautical chart of it. The chart is based on a survey of the mouth of the Hangang River the two sides conducted together late last year. That survey was conducted by 20 officials from both Koreas and was a part of the military agreement signed in September to eventually allow private ships access to the waterway. Earlier this week, an elderly woman who'd been sexually enslaved by Japan during World War II died. With her funeral underway, activists have resumed their weekly Wednesday demonstrations, calling on Japan to formally apologize to and compensate its victims, the so-called comfort women. Today, at the latest of the rallies, which have been held since 1992, there was a moment of remembrance for Kim Bok-dong, who passed away on Monday at the age of 92. She was one of the first comfort women to speak out about her ordeal and became a prominent activist for the cause. Historians say some 200,000 women, mostly from Korea, were forced into sexual slavery at Japanese military brothels during the war. With Kim's passing, only 23 Korean victims are still alive. Tensions have been rising between South Korea and Japan over the past several weeks over multiple disputed encounters between their militaries. And with those unresolved, South Korean foreign ministry officials are due in Japan today to meet with their Japanese counterparts and officials with the U.S. military. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Seoul's foreign ministry says Kim Tae-jin, the Director General of the ministry's North American Affairs Bureau, is scheduled to travel to Japan on Wednesday for a 2-day trip, accompanied by other ministry officials.
Kim Tae-jin will visit UN flag bases in Japan from January 30th to the 31st after receiving an invitation from the UN. He's expected to meet with officials from U.S. Forces Japan.
The visit will provide Kim and his delegation a chance to meet with their Japanese counterparts, as the two countries have been embroiled in a radar dispute involving a Japanese maritime patrol jet and a South Korean naval destroyer in December. Watchers say it's possible Washington will play a mediating role between its regional allies to resolve the standoff, as there could be a trilateral session joined by a representative from the U.S. Forces Japan. This comes as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Harry Harris, had a series of meetings with South Korea's defense and foreign ministers in Seoul on Monday, in which they covered recent issues. Japan's Defense Minister Takeshi Iwaya, speaking to Japanese broadcaster NHK on Tuesday, called for a need to cool tensions, adding that a meeting with his South Korean counterpart could happen soon. Seoul-Tokyo relations have deteriorated to levels not seen in years over the radar dispute. It has been compounded by the ongoing tensions over Japan's wartime atrocities against Korea, especially Tokyo's use of forced labor and its military sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Mixed messages are coming out of Washington on North Korea. One of the top intelligence chiefs in the U.S. is contradicting President Trump on the progress being made with Pyongyang, saying the North is going to be reluctant to give up its nuclear weapons. Oh Jung-hee reports.
It is unlikely that North Korea will fully give up its nuclear weapons, and the regime continues to act in a way that's not consistent with denuclearization. That's how the U.S. intelligence community views North Korea right now, quite contrary to President Trump's optimism about the denuclearization talks. The heads of U.S. intelligence agencies attended a hearing Tuesday at the Senate Intelligence Committee. One of them was the Director of National Intelligence, Daniel Gov't.
We currently assess that North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities because its leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival.
He also hinted that the North is still working on its nuclear and missile programs.
Our assessment is bolstered by our observations of some activity that is inconsistent with full denuclearization.
Meanwhile, a report that came out the same day from the Belfer Center at the Harvard Kennedy School says North Korea may have enough fissile material to make dozens of nuclear weapons, and that it continues to produce more of them despite agreeing not to. Some experts in South Korea, though, while they acknowledge that the North has promised to denuclearize, what it really wants is to be recognized as a nuclear state.
In the New Year's address, Kim Jong-un said the regime won't produce more nuclear weapons or use them. That message actually means that the North wants to show itself as a nuclear power. Legal nuclear states have obligation not to use or transfer nuclear weapons.
The U.S. intelligence community apparently thinks that even while North Korea agrees to take partial steps to denuclearize, it's only to gain key concessions, namely sanctions relief. Gov't assessed Pyongyang's diplomatic engagement as a way of gaining leverage, its statements repeatedly implying that diplomacy won't continue unless sanctions are eased. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
For more, we have joining us today Dr. James Kim, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you here with us today.
Nice to see you again, Jang-ho.
So, Dan Gov't, the U.S. Director for National Intelligence, told a Senate committee that North Korea are unlikely to give up their nuclear weapons completely due to the fact that they consider it essential for the regime's survival. So, for many North Korea observers, this is not anything new, but this does go against what the Trump administration have been saying since it started engaging with North Korea. How significant is it that Gov't has come out and said this statement against what Trump has previously said?
Well, I'm not sure it's completely inconsistent. What Dan Gov't and others in the intelligence community have been saying about North Korea in terms of denuclearization, with regards to denuclearization, it's based on an intelligence estimate. So the key word here is not whether North Korea will or will not, but I think the word that we need to focus on here is whether it is likely that North Korea will denuclearize. And I think the reality is that the Trump administration recognizes that the likelihood is relatively low. With respect to Trump administration's position, and whether the president's statement on this or Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's statement with regards to whether or not North Korea will denuclearize, I think it's largely driven by the diplomatic strategy to get North Korea to denuclearize. So I think it's important to separate the two. One is an intelligence estimate, and the other is largely driven by diplomatic effort to try to get North Korea to denuclearize.
But you say, the important word there is unlikely, but still quite a pessimistic view that Gov't has given in that hearing. So do you think, how much hope do you think the Trump administration really has in getting North Korea really to denuclearize then?
Well, if you follow through the complete transcript of that hearing, I think Gov't also laid out a glimmer of hope, a possibility that maybe North Korea, although it is unlikely, may have made the strategic decision to denuclearize. And so the administration's position on this is that they do not know. Even though the intelligence estimate suggests that the likelihood is low, the fact of the matter is they don't have enough information to make a deterministic conclusion about whether or not North Korea will denuclearize. So they are trying to test that proposition out. And that's what all this diplomatic effort and the engagement is all about. For the past year, the U.S. position has consistently been that they do not know if North Korea will denuclearize, and that's why they're not relieving the sanctions before North Korea takes definitive steps towards denuclearization.
With it so uncertain, it is quite a gamble then Trump is taking towards North Korea.
Oh, indeed. It's a gamble for everyone. But what other options are there? And so do we go back to 2017 with Fire and Fury, or do we try out the diplomatic route and see where we go from here. At the very least, I think a lot of the foreign policy community wants to test out this proposition, whether Kim Jong-un has indeed made the decision to denuclearize. And again, only time will tell.
Only time will tell, but then let's look at what we do know at the moment. So this next North Korea-U.S. summit has been announced to take place in late February, which is only a month away from now, really. But so far, there's still no confirmation on the exact date and location. So how do you think preparations are going so far?
Well, you know, the announcement was made a few days ago, and again, that came from Washington with President Trump. North Korea hasn't confirmed anything. There needs to be a lot of working level meetings leading up to the second summit. We've only had one. So it's possible that this will get delayed. We've had other delays before. We've heard rumors that the summit might happen late last year, and it didn't. So again, it's always possible that things will get pushed back a little bit, but both sides are on track to engage. And so we're at a different place than we were in December.
There's also the question of the U.S. shutdown. I mean, that a government only reopened really temporary basis, and then we might see another shutdown. If we do see another shutdown, do you think Trump will be able to hold this summit, or will it have to be delayed? Well,
if you remember Kim Yong-chul's visit, it was during the shutdown. And Steve Biegun's trip to Sweden, Stockholm, was during the shutdown.
But that was Kim Yong-chul coming to Washington. No. For Trump to go all the way to, for example, they're saying Vietnam, that's quite a big, you'll be away for a few days at least.
No. The State Department is not completely shut down during the shutdown. There are certain essential services that are required to still check in and clock in for that work. They do not get paid. Steve Biegun, along with other counterparts in the State Department, the Defense Department is obviously not impacted by the shutdown. The Treasury Sanctions Division is an essential component. They're also required to check in and clock in even though they're not getting paid. They're doing tremendous service by showing up without getting paid. Granted, they will get back paid for their work, but believe me when I say this, the administration is in full operational mode, or was in full operational mode, even during shutdown with respect to North Korea.
But if I just stick with this point, but Trump stopped Nancy Pelosi going to the Middle East, saying that she should be more focused about domestic issues. Well, wouldn't he be under the same kind of attacks?
Well, Nancy Pelosi's trip to the Middle East is not an essential federal government business, but an ongoing negotiation with a rogue state where you might find a diplomatic solution to the current stalemate. Very important priority from a foreign policy standpoint. And all necessary components of the administration were in operational mode during that time.
So let's assume that the summit is going to happen in late February, but that means that working level talks need to be ongoing and discussions for what they will agree during that summit. We're not sure how far along they are really, but the South Korea's intelligence chief told lawmakers on Tuesday that North Korea and the U.S. are now expected to start drafting the agreement that they'll try to reach in the summit. Do you think some sort of framework is in place?
If we're going to have a summit at the end of February, as President Trump announced, indeed, that work should be underway at the moment, theoretically, but we do not have any confirmation from either Washington or Pyongyang that that is in fact what's going on. So until I hear it from the horse's mouth, I'm going to withhold any judgment about this. But you can rest assured that a lot of the working level meetings, or at least the posturing leading up to the next working level meetings, are going to be focused on these issues.
The Washington Times reported that the Trump administration is preparing some sort of special economic package for Kim Jong-un in exchange for denuclearization. It's being described as a pot of gold to prove Kim that they are committed to providing economic cooperation once their nukes are gone. Do you really think that kind of, some sort of plan like that might be in place?
Well, it's a very interesting idea. The Washington Times article referred to the potential of creating an escrow account that is managed by a third party, who essentially will look to see whether or not the agreement struck between U.S. and North Korea is being honored. And that escrow account can be managed in two different ways. You could either put the lump sum amount in the beginning and try to disperse piecemeal basis, depending on what kinds of steps North Korea takes towards denuclearization, as a form of a payment for each step that they take. But there's an issue there because you have a cash transfer, it's potentially in violation of the existing sanctions regime. The other way to do this without violating the sanctions is to actually increase, on a piecemeal basis, depending on the measures that North Korea takes, the amount of money that is going into the escrow account. So the escrow account will continue to grow, but North Korea will not be able to cash in that escrow account until the sanctions are completely off and denuclearization is there. And it's confirmed by that third party. At the very least, nobody else will be able to cash in that account other than Kim Jong-un, whose name that account will be for. So depending on how we do this, and in that case, I don't think we're in violation of the sanctions. Depending on how we organize that escrow account and who manages it, I would imagine the IAEA will have some part or role to play in that. I think we have different challenges that we need to discuss, whether we have to engage in partial sanctions relief for this kind of an agreement, or whether or not we do some other agreements where North Korea is willing to accept an escrow account that they could cash in after sanctions relief has occurred with complete denuclearization.
So this is different from previous, for example, monetary economic packages that have been given to North Korea for previous denuclearization deals?
It is very creative because if you think about the second kind of arrangement I just talked about, you are keeping the sanctions regime in place. And you have a mechanism for looking to see whether or not both sides are keeping up with their end of the bargain with respect to that agreement. And it's a third party that judges that. And then there's a form of a payment, and you can see and measure how much each side will get as a result of, whatever measure that North Korea takes on denuclearization and whatever amount that the U.S. and its allies are willing to put into that account. Yeah. So if North Korea wants to do this on a piecemeal stage basis, the payments will also be in a piecemeal stage basis. Yeah. So it satisfies a lot of the problems that we saw with these negotiations. A lot of people pointed out these kinds of problems when it comes to negotiating with North Korea. Yeah. And this arrangement would at least have an answer to all those questions.
Let's wait to see if we hear more about this special escrow account, but we'll have to wait to see what happens there. Let me focus on one more piece of exclusive that's coming out from the US as well. The Washington Post this time ran an exclusive saying that Russia is looking to get involved in the situation with North Korea by offering Pyongyang a nuclear power plant exchange for denuclearization. Now, this report says it was offered last year, and it gives some credibility to the fact that Trump has this special relationship with Putin. What do you make of this report?
Well, if you remember last year, towards the end of last year, there was a rumor of a potential meeting between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. That didn't materialize as the meeting with President Trump, or the meeting with President Xi end of last year, or the visit. A rumor of a potential visit by Kim Jong-un to Seoul. None of that materialized at the end of last year. But one of the things that was mentioned was a potential meeting between Kim Jong-un and Putin. And Russia has always looked for opportunities to insert itself into this negotiation having to do with North Korea. And this is not the first time they've proposed something related to energy. They've talked about a gas pipeline from Siberia into North Korea towards South Korea. So this is not at all unrealistic that Russia is contemplating these possibilities, and it's not at all unrealistic that North Korea is also thinking about this possibility as well. But I'm not sure how this is linked with President Trump, if at all. Again, it's speculation at this point, and there's a lot of evidence mounting, and that's a separate issue that has to do with what's going on in the United States with respect to the election in 2016. And with regards to North Korea, I'm not sure there was any kind of coordination between Washington and Moscow about this. But at the very least, we do know that Russia is interested in inserting itself, and North Korea doesn't look like it's not interested. It seems as though it is interested. So the question is whether or not we will see something come out of this.
But why would Moscow want to get involved in this? Because it is such a messy situation. Would they want to get their hands dirty? What do they get out of it, I mean?
Well, if relations between North Korea and South Korea gets better and there's actual economic cooperation and exchange taking place. It's one way that Russia can gain access to the South Korean market, and also to the Japanese market, depending on whether or not we see gas pipelines or oil pipelines or other things underway. So they see tremendous potential here with respect to their insertion into Northeast Asian markets. The question is whether or not North Korea can play that pivotal role for Russia. And they've always thought about this possibility, but they've never really, it never really materialized. So again, they're thinking about some other ways to insert themselves into this whole process.
It's been a fascinating talk today. Thank you for giving us your insights.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes this show for today, but do stay tuned to Arirang for a later newscast for the latest updates from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching and hope you can join us again next time. Goodbye.